Hey there, thrill seekers. Are you ready for a spine-tingling experience? Because tonight, we have 3 terrifying 4th of July horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. The 4th of July. It's a time for ghost stories, whispered around flickering campfires, tales to chill and thrill. But be warned, you might not want to be alone in the dark. Deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town, stood an old cabin. Its wooden walls were weathered gray, windows dark and unseeing. The wind howled through the trees, a mournful symphony accompanying the relentless rain. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, a strangely comforting aroma that did little to dispel the growing unease. This cabin held secrets, whispered on the wind, etched into its very bones. Inside, 5 friends huddled together, 5 friends seeking refuge from the storm. What had started as a light-hearted 4th of July getaway had taken a decidedly sinister turn. The power was out, plunging the cabin into an unsettling darkness illuminated only by the firelight. "Let's tell scary stories," suggested Mark, his voice barely a whisper. The others nodded, a mixture of apprehension and excitement in their eyes. It seemed like a good idea at the time, a way to distract from the howling wind and the oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides. They should have known better. "They say he still wanders." Emily, her eyes wide and gleaming in the firelight, began to speak. "There's a story about a miner who got lost in these woods years ago. He was caught in a storm just like this one. They say he wandered for days, calling out for help, but no one could hear him above the wind and the rain. Eventually, he stumbled upon this very cabin." The others leaned closer, captivated by her tale. Outside, the wind howled in agreement, as if echoing the lost miner's cries. A sudden sound cut through the silence, a sharp, insistent rapping on the old wooden door. The friends froze, Emily's story dying on her lips. The sound, so unexpected, so out of place in the stillness of the night, sent a jolt of fear through them. They stared at the door, each holding their breath, as if afraid to break the spell. The knocking came again, louder this time, demanding to be acknowledged. Who could that be? None of them had an answer. They were miles from civilization, deep in the woods, on a night when no sane person would be out. He stood on the porch, rain dripping from his hat. Mark, his heart pounding in his chest, slowly approached the door. With a deep breath, he reached for the handle and pulled it open. Standing on the porch, illuminated by the dim porch light, was a man. He was tall and gaunt, his clothes soaked through, rain dripping from the brim of his wide-brimmed hat. His face was obscured by the shadows, but the friends could sense his eyes upon them, cold and piercing. For a moment, no one spoke. The stranger simply stood there, the silence stretching out between them, thick with unspoken tension. Then, in a voice raspy and low, he spoke. "May I come in? I seem to be lost." A collective gasp. The stranger was gone. Mark hesitated, unsure whether to trust his instincts or the desperate plea in the stranger's voice. He glanced back at his friends, their faces pale and drawn in the flickering firelight. Before he could make a decision, the stranger swayed, his hand reaching out towards them as if seeking support. Mark instinctively stepped back, pulling the door closed just as a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the clearing. The thunderclap that followed was instantaneous, shaking the very foundations of the cabin. When the sound faded and their senses returned, they rushed to the door, flinging it open once more. The porch was empty. The stranger was gone. A collective gasp escaped their lips, a mixture of fear and disbelief. Where had he gone? Had he ever really been there at all? Or had the storm and their own fear conjured him from their darkest imaginations? The old house loomed before them, a silhouette against the storm. The old Victorian house loomed before them, a skeletal silhouette against the raging storm. Lightning split the sky, momentarily illuminating its crumbling facade, the windows dark and vacant like the eyes of a skull. John and Mary, their car dead in the middle of nowhere, had stumbled upon it in desperation, seeking shelter from the relentless downpour. The rain seemed to intensify as they approached, each drop a hammer blow against the overgrown foliage that choked the path. "Are you sure about this?" Mary asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. John, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel, squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's just an old house, love, better than being stuck out here." Section 2. A place out of time. Dust-covered furniture, cobwebs draped like macabre decorations. The front door creaked open with a groan, as if disturbed after years of slumber. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay, dust motes dancing in the faint light that filtered through the grimy windows. They stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The house felt heavy, burdened by years of forgotten memories. Dust-covered furniture huddled together like ghosts, their outlines barely discernible in the gloom. Cobwebs, thick and grey, draped the room like macabre decorations, clinging to the once grand chandelier that hung precariously from the ceiling. It felt like a place out of time, frozen in a perpetual state of decay. Section 3. The diary. Beneath a loose floorboard they found it. As the storm raged outside, John and Mary explored the house, hoping to find some sign of life, a phone line, anything that could connect them to the outside world. In the living room, beneath a threadbare rug, they discovered a trapdoor leading to a small dirt floor cellar. Curiosity overriding their better judgment, they descended into the darkness, their flashlight beam cutting through the musty air. The cellar was small and cramped, the walls lined with shelves stacked haphazardly with old jars and boxes. It was there, beneath a loose floorboard, that John discovered a small, leather-bound diary. Its pages were brittle with age, the ink faded but still legible. On the first page, scrawled in elegant cursive, were the words, "This is the diary of Eleanor Vance. July 4th, 1904. Section 4. Echoes of the Past. July 4th, 1904. The storm rages. Eleanor's words, penned over a century ago, painted a chilling picture of a life lived in fear. She wrote of the storm, of being trapped in the house, of strange and unsettling occurrences. July 4th, 1904, she wrote, her words shaky and uneven. The storm rages outside, mirroring the turmoil within these walls. I fear I am not alone. Something dark dwells here. As John read aloud, a cold draft snaked its way into the cellar, extinguishing their flashlight. The darkness that descended was absolute, suffocating. A sudden crash from upstairs sent shivers down their spines. Section 5. Trapped. They were not alone. Fear, primal and consuming, tightened its grip on John and Mary. They fumbled for their flashlight, their hands shaking, but it was no use. The batteries, drained by the damp and the passage of time, were dead. They were trapped, plunged into an abyss of inky blackness, the silence broken only by the frantic beating of their own hearts. Then they heard it. A soft, shuffling sound coming from the stairs. Something was coming down the stairs, something that moved with an unnatural grace, its presence heralded by a wave of icy cold. John and Mary huddled together, their breath catching in their throats. Section 6. One last spark. A desperate hope flickered in the darkness, a tiny glimmer that seemed almost too fragile to survive in the oppressive gloom that surrounded them. John, his hand instinctively reaching into his pocket, remembered the lighter he always carried. It was a small silver object, a gift from his father, and it had never seemed more precious than in that moment. A single flickering flame, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. The flame wavered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls, but it held steady, a tiny defiance against the encroaching night. As he flicked the lighter to life, the shadows danced back, momentarily revealing the source of their terror. The light pushed the darkness away, creating a small circle of safety around them. Standing on the bottom step, bathed in the eerie orange glow, was a woman. She seemed almost ethereal, as if she were a part of the shadows themselves, yet the light made her presence undeniable. Her clothes were tattered and torn, her long dark hair matted and tangled. She looked like she'd been through unimaginable hardships, her appearance a testament to the horrors she had faced. But it was her face that sent a chill down their spines. It was a haunting visage, one that seemed to carry the weight of countless sorrows and untold stories of pain. It was a mask of sorrow, her eyes hollow and filled with an unspeakable sadness. Those eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness, reaching out to them with a silent plea. For a moment she simply stared at them, her expression a mixture of longing and despair. It was as if she was searching for something, or someone, in their faces, hoping for a connection that could never be. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished, melting back into the shadows as if she had never been there at all. The darkness swallowed her whole, leaving only the memory of her haunting presence. John and Mary, their hearts pounding in their chests, scrambled up the stairs and out of the cellar, desperate to escape the horrors of the house. They could still feel the weight of her gaze, the sorrow in her eyes, as they fled into the night, hoping to leave the terror behind them. Section 1. The Lone Traveler. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the world outside into a swirling kaleidoscope of water and shadow. The wipers worked overtime, struggling to keep up with the relentless downpour. Inside the car, David Wilson gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. He was lost, miles off course, and the storm showed no signs of abating. His GPS had died an hour ago, leaving him at the mercy of the elements and the winding, unfamiliar roads. He had been driving for hours, desperate to reach his destination, his parents' house, in time for their annual 4th of July barbecue. Now, with each passing mile, that hope dwindled, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. Section 2. A Beacon in the Night. The inn stood at the edge of town, shrouded in fog. Just when his hope began to dwindle, a faint glow appeared in the distance, cutting through the gloom like a beacon. As he drew closer, the outline of a building emerged from the swirling fog. A sign, barely visible through the sheets of rain, proclaimed it to be the Whispering Pines Inn. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. David pulled into the deserted parking lot, the silence, broken only by the drumming of rain, amplifying the feeling of isolation that had been creeping up on him all night. He gathered his jacket, stepping out into the deluge. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, a strangely comforting aroma that did little to dispel the growing unease in his gut. Section 3. Room 13. No one stayed in that room for years. The interior of the inn was dimly lit, the air stale and heavy. Behind a dust-covered counter, a man sat hunched over a newspaper, his face obscured by the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. He looked up as David approached, his eyes dark and fathomless, seeming to take in every detail of the weary traveler. "David, just me," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Awful night." The man grunted, his gaze unwavering. He reached for a key, the brass tag glinting in the dim light. "Old man, room 13, he rasped, sliding the key across the counter. David hesitated. "David, any other rooms available?" The man's lips twitched in something resembling a smile. "Old man, not tonight," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But don't you worry. No one stayed in that room for years." Section 4. The Vanishing. He was gone. Vanished without a trace. It was as if the darkness itself had swallowed him whole, leaving no sign of his existence behind. The alley, once a place of fleeting shadows, now seemed to hold a deeper, more sinister secret. David made his way to room 13, each step echoing ominously on the creaking floorboards. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the dim light casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the walls. Every creak and groan of the old building seemed to whisper warnings, but David pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency he couldn't quite explain. The room was small and sparsely furnished, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and forgotten memories. The wallpaper, once vibrant, now hung in tatters, peeling away to reveal the decaying walls beneath. It was a place that seemed to exist outside of time, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. He tossed his bag on the bed and sat down, exhausted. The bed creaked under his weight, the springs protesting as if they hadn't been used in years. He rubbed his temples, trying to ease the tension that had built up over the long journey. The room's oppressive atmosphere seemed to seep into his very bones, draining his energy. He tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over him like a shroud, but it clung to him, whispering doubts in the back of his mind. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound seemed amplified, feeding his growing paranoia. He couldn't help but feel that he was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking his every move. He decided to try and call his parents, let them know he was safe, even if he wouldn't make it for the barbecue. The thought of hearing their voices brought a small measure of comfort, a connection to the normalcy he so desperately craved. He fumbled with his phone, his hands trembling slightly as he dialed their number, but there was no signal. The screen remained blank, mocking him with its silence. He moved around the room, hoping to find a spot where the signal might break through, but it was futile. He tried again and again, but all he got was static. Each failed attempt only heightened his sense of isolation, the realization that he was truly cut off from the outside world sinking in. The static seemed to grow louder, a relentless hiss that filled the room, drowning out his thoughts. Frustrated, he tossed the phone on the nightstand. The device landed with a dull thud, its screen flickering briefly before going dark. He ran his hands through his hair, trying to calm the rising tide of panic that threatened to overwhelm him. That's when he noticed it. His bag, the one he had tossed on the bed just moments ago, was gone, vanished without a trace. He blinked, unable to believe his eyes. He searched the room frantically, hoping it had simply fallen off the bed. But it was nowhere to be found. The one he had tossed on the bed just moments ago was gone, vanished without a trace. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He was not alone in this room. Something or someone was here with him, and it had taken his bag. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing in as his heart pounded in his chest. Section 5. Whispers from the past. A voice, thin and reedy, whispered his name. Panic clawed at the edges of David's mind, threatening to consume him. He searched the room frantically, but the bag was gone. It was as if it had never been there at all. He was alone, trapped in this strange, silent inn. He tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. He rattled the handle, his heart pounding in his chest, but it was no use. He was trapped. Then, from somewhere deep within the walls, he heard it. A voice, thin and reedy, barely audible above the howling wind. It whispered his name. The 4th of July, curse. They never leave, not on this night. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant crackle of fireworks. But within the walls of the old house, the atmosphere was different, charged with an eerie energy that made the hairs on the back of David's neck stand on end. The voice grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the room, seeping into his very bones. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing, whispering secrets of the past that refused to be forgotten. He recognized the voice now. It was unmistakable, a haunting echo from his childhood that he had tried so hard to forget. It was his mother's voice, but it was different. It carried a weight, a sorrow that was foreign to the comforting tones he remembered. Twisted, filled with a despair that chilled him to the core. The sound of her voice, once a source of solace, now sent shivers down his spine. Terrified, David backed away, stumbling over a loose floorboard. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing the growing dread that consumed him. As he fell, his hand brushed against something cold and metallic. The sensation was jarring, pulling him momentarily out of his fear-induced haze. He looked down and saw a small, tarnished locket lying on the floor. It seemed out of place, a relic from another time, forgotten and abandoned. He picked it up, recognizing it instantly. The intricate design, the delicate craftsmanship. It was unmistakably his mother's. It was his mother's locket, the one she always wore, a symbol of her love and protection, the one she always wore. But now it felt different, heavy with a significance he couldn't quite grasp. As he stared at the locket, the spectral figure solidified, taking on a horrifyingly familiar form. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen, as if the house itself was reacting to the presence. It was his mother, but her face was contorted in an expression of pure agony, her eyes burning with an eerie green light. The sight was both heartbreaking and terrifying, a twisted mockery of the woman he once knew. "They never leave," she whispered, her voice a raspy croak. "Not on this night." The words hung in the air, heavy with a sense of finality and doom. Not on the 4th of July. The night outside was alive with celebration, but within these walls, a different kind of history was being remembered. A history of sorrow, of loss, and of spirits that refused to rest. David knew then that this night was not just about fireworks and festivities. It was a night when the past came alive, demanding to be acknowledged, refusing to be forgotten. And as the clock struck midnight, he realized that the 4th of July would never be the same again. The storm raged on, indifferent to the terrors it had unleashed. Outside, the storm raged on, a relentless symphony of wind and rain. The city, usually alive with the sounds of celebration, lay shrouded in an uneasy silence. Fireworks, cancelled due to the inclement weather, sat dormant, their promised explosions replaced by the rumble of thunder. Inside homes, behind rain-streaked windows, people slept, oblivious to the terrors that had unfolded on this stormy 4th of July night. They slept, unaware of the thin veil that separates our world from the next, a veil worn thin by the storm, by fear, by the stories we tell ourselves in the dark. The rain continued to fall, washing away the evidence of the night's events, leaving behind only a lingering sense of unease, a whisper of something cold and unseen lurking just beyond the edge of our perception. 3 stories, 3 glimpses into the darkness that festers. We've borne witness tonight to the darkness that festers beneath the surface of celebration. We've seen the fear in the eyes of friends huddled in a remote cabin, a stranger at the door, a harbinger of something sinister. We felt the despair of a couple trapped in a house haunted by a tragedy from the past, their every move watched by unseen eyes. And we've shared the terror of a lone traveler seeking refuge in a place where the veil between life and death is as thin as a whisper, where the dead refuse to stay buried, especially on this night. 3 stories, 3 glimpses into the abyss that awaits us when the lights go out and the shadows begin to dance. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, the storm outside may have subsided, but the echoes of these stories linger. A chill down your spine, a sense of unease in the pit of your stomach, a sudden awareness of the shadows lengthening in the corners of your room. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember the tales we've shared. Remember that the line between reality and nightmare can be blurred, especially on a night like this. And if you hear a knock at your door, a whisper of your name in the darkness, well, let's just say, you've been warned. Happy 4th of July. Sleep tight. Don't let the bedbugs bite.